Welcome to day 2 video, where we will look at factoring by grouping and look at different examples and how to efficiently factor to find our factored forms. So again, with our objectives that we'll look at for day 2, we are looking at factoring when A is equal to 1. And what I mean by that is when you look at your quadratic standard form of your quadratic equation, this is the value I'm talking about. When A is equal to 1 or A is greater than 1, we have some factoring methods that we'll look at. One of the factoring methods is I call it the X method, and it's only because that's how we organize our numbers, okay? We have a trial and error method, and it's a guess and check your way, and it's fine, and it can work. But this is a method that helps us find the factors that we need, and it's all of the questions that I'm going to ask are going to be in regard to what's the product of C. Okay, when I talk about what's the product of A and C, but that sum has to equal B and X. That's what I'm going to talk about every time when we think about factoring by grouping. A times C, and that product, those factors of A times C, better add to give me BX. And that will make a little bit more sense as we go through our videos. So looking at the first one, notice all of these have an A value of 1. It's not written, but it's understood to be 1. So the question I would ask, if you're a trial and error method, you're thinking, well, I know this one's got to be X, this one's got to be X, and now I'm just kind of playing around with numbers to see what these would be. Okay, that would be a trial and error type of method to do that. With our organization method with the X, what goes in the top is the product of A and C. Well, A is 1. So really I'm looking at what are two numbers that multiply to give me 3. That's 1 times 3. But they add to give me this term of 4X. Well, these two terms will have an X with it, of course, because they have to add to give me 4X. So since A is 1, and I need the two factors to multiply to give me 3 and add to give me 4, the factors have to be 1 and 3, because 1 times 3 is 3, but they add together to give me 4. So I'm allowed to write X plus 1X, or X plus X, X plus 1, not 1X. X plus 1 and X plus 3. This is the factored form of this trinomial. Now, a way to check that, while I have up here optional, check by multiplying, is that I could multiply X times X, get X squared, and X times 3, and I get 3X, and 1 times X, and I get 1X, and 1 times 3, and I get 3. So I'm not going to do this for every one, but this one I want you to see that if you combine your middle terms, you get X squared plus 4X plus 3. And it's what we started with initially. But what I wanted was the factored form. Okay, next problem. I've got X squared minus 2X minus 3. And I need two factors that are going to multiply to give me 1 times negative 3, which is negative 3. But they have to add to give me negative 2. So factors that give me that multiply to give me negative 3, but add to give me negative 2, have to be 3 and 1. But one of them is going to have to be negative and one's going to be positive, and it's going to be this way. Negative 3 plus 1 gives me the negative 2, but negative 3 times 1 gives me the -3. And since A is positive, and since A is 1, we are allowed to take exactly what we see here, and I get x minus 3 and x plus 1. And that's going to be a nice hint based on our patterns. It's not a shortcut or anything, but it's just what we would notice if we worked a whole bunch of these. We would see that every time we choose these numbers, they end up repeating themselves over here in our factored form. And that is because A is equal to 1. We will see that change when A is not equal to 1, but for these exercises, we're going to see that pattern over and over. Next, I've got x squared plus 7x plus 8. And like I said in the previous video, a lot of times when we're working with these, it's a good time to maybe hit the pause button. Just every time we write one down, give you a chance to work it, then you can kind of check your work. And you have that option with this. That's a nice thing with videos is you can pause, work, hit play again, and check your work against my efforts here. So A is 1, so we know we've got 1 times 8, which is 8. Remember, that's your A times C. And what should it add to be? It should add to be 7x. Okay, so what are two numbers that multiply to give you 8 but add to give you 7? And in this case, 8 and 1, that gives you 8, but they add to give you 9. Doesn't add to give you 7. So sometimes you can't factor it, so we call it a prime expression. Now, later in the year, we will see that we can find the solutions to this. We use the quadratic formula or we use completing the square. But in regard to factoring, we would say that it's prime. Next, we've got x squared minus 10x minus 24. And we're always looking at this sign here. So that's 1 times a negative 24. So that gives us negative 24. What are two numbers that multiply to give me negative 24 and add to give me negative 10, that middle term? And that would be, looks like 12 and 2. That multiplies to give me 24, which would make, this has to be negative, so this would be negative. What's a negative 12 plus a plus 2? That's negative 10. What's negative 12 times positive 2? That's negative 24. So we found our two factors. So it would be x minus 12 and x plus 2. And remember how we could check that if we needed to. Multiply these out, and that should result back with what we started. One more, I've got x squared minus 6x plus 9. A is 1, so 1 times 9 is 9. What are two factors that multiply to give me 9 but add to give me negative 6? And it would be 3 and 3, but it's got to be negative 6, so therefore these need to be negative, because what's a negative 3 plus a negative 3? Well, that's a negative 6. Well, what's negative 3 times negative 3? Well, that's 9. So you get x minus 3 times x minus 3. That's correct, but so is this. So both of them have the same form. This would be an example of a perfect square trinomial. All of these links within the presentations will always take you to extra practice, so just be mindful of that. You want to see some different practice that takes you to a website that gives you answers as well that you can check. But all of the links are correlation to or support the work that we're doing within the slides. So take advantage of those extra practice when you need it. These are good problems. You'll definitely see these on your final exam where I'm asking you to factor. And a factor completely, okay? So with some of these, I want you to look at, well, what do they have in common? What does each term have in common? Well, you look at you look at this term, and you look at this term, and you look at this term, and you see, can I divide 3 by each of them? And in this case, you can. So I'm going to divide everything by 3, and I'm left with x squared minus 11x, and 3 will divide 54 18 times. So now I'm looking at what's inside the parentheses. I need 2 numbers that multiply to give me 18 and add to give me negative 11. And that would be 9 and 2, and both of them would be negative, because negative 9 plus a negative 2 is a negative 11. But what's a negative 9 times a negative 2? Well, that's positive 18. So I still have to bring my 3 factor, but I'm allowed to write x minus 9 from here and x minus 2 from here. So this would be factored completely. Another one would be 2x squared minus 18x plus 28. Again, this coefficient, this a value is not 1, it's 2. So I want to see, can I divide 2 by each of them? And I can. So I'm left with x squared minus 9x plus 14. Dividing each term by 2, I result in this trinomial. Now, a is 1. So I want to try to factor that. 1 times 14 is 14. I need 2 factors of 14 that are going to add to give me negative 9, and it's going to be 7 and 2, and they both have to be negative. So factor of 2, x minus 7 from right here, and x minus 2 from right there. So that would be factored completely. Third example, 5x squared plus 20x plus 15. I look at 5, 20, and 15, and they all have a 5 in common. Notice they don't all have an x in common. That's why there's not an x factored out. 5 divides 20 and 15, so I'm going to have x squared plus 4x plus 3. And a is 1, so I'm looking at what are 2 numbers that multiply to give me 3. 1 times 3 is 3. And add to give me 4. Factors of 3 would be 3 and 1. So I've got 5 times x plus 3 coming from here, and x plus 1 coming from here, and there's my factored form. 3x squared minus 21x plus 30. Factor out of 3. X squared minus 7x plus 10. I need 2 numbers that multiply to give me 10, but add to give me negative 7. And that would be 5 and 2, and they would both be negative. Why? Because they have to add to give me a negative. But when they multiply, remember negative times negative is a positive. So I get 3 times x minus 5 times x minus 2, and there's my completely factored form. Last exercise, I got 4x squared minus 12x minus 60. And 4 will divide each of these. So I'm left with x squared minus 3x minus, minus 15. A is 1. Don't forget the c is negative. So that's going to be 1 times a negative 15, which would be negative 15. And they have to add to give me negative 3. So in this case, I know 5 and 3 are factors of 15, but I can't add or subtract them to be a negative 3. So what I have is a prime. So 4 times x squared minus 3x minus 5 would be a factored form. Now, these next 5 are examples of, well, what if you can't factor out? What if you can't factor out anything in common? So you're back to your, 8, 18, and 9. They don't have a common factor. So now that leaves us with a bigger than 1. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do our factor by grouping. which we've looked at last video. Now, how do I find these factors? Well, I'm going to take A times C, as I have been, except for the last few examples, A has been 1. Well, now A is bigger than 1. So now I got 8 times 9, and I've got 72. And I'm looking for factors of 72, but add to give me 18. So you're looking for factors of 72 that add to give you this 18. And it's not going to be 9 and 8, even though 9 times 8 is 72. 9 and 8 don't add to be 18. So 6 and 12 both add to 18, but both multiply to 72. So since I've found these, I cannot just write x plus 6 and x plus 12. Okay, I'm writing that down to say that is something I cannot do because A is not 1. So what I'm going to do is go back to my trinomial, and these two terms are going to take the place of 18x. So I'm going to get 8x squared. I'm going to write the first term. I'm not going to write 18x. I'm going to write 6x plus 12x plus 9. And now we are right back to an example that we looked at with our first video when we were factoring by grouping, where we needed to group 2 and 2 and find the GCF. So 8 and 6 would be 2x, since they both contain an x. And that would be 4x plus 3. And 12 and 9 would be 3. So this would be 12x divided by 3 would be 4x. 9 divided by 3 would be 3. Notice they match up. So you're left with 2x plus 3 and 4x plus 3. This would be the factored form of example number 1. A little bit more of a process with that. Why? Because A was not 1. Second example, 2x squared plus 3x minus 20. You always want to check, can I divide 2 by every term? And the answer is no. So I'm going to take A, and I'm going to take C, and that's 2 times a negative 20, and that's negative 40. I need two numbers that are going to multiply to give me negative 40, but add to give me positive 3. Well, in order to add to give me positive, means one's got to be positive, one's got to be negative. 40 would be 8 and 5. This one would be positive, this one would be negative. Now notice how I'm going to write these. Since this one's positive, this one's negative, 2x squared, I'm just going to write this term. And I can because they're interchangeable. So 2x squared minus 5x plus 8x, and then rewrite the last term. See how these terms correspond. I'm rewriting the first term, rewriting the last term, and what's taking the place of 3x? It's these two right here. Now I go back to my factor by grouping, and notice I switched the 8 and the negative 5, right? Why? Because that keeps this one positive, and I'm allowed to do that. So factor out here. The only thing they have in common is an x, which leaves me 2x minus 5. 8 and 20. Well, 4 is the greatest common factor. 8x divided by 4 is 2x. Negative 20 divided by 4 is negative 5. So x plus 4 and 2x minus 5 is the factored form for our original here on part B. Part C, 6x squared minus 19x plus 10. 6, 19, and 10, they don't have anything in common, so I've got to take A times C, which is 60. And I need two numbers that are going to add to give me negative 19. Two numbers that multiply to give me 60, add to give me negative 19 would be 15 and 4. They both add to give you 19, but it's got to be a negative 19. So what does that tell you about the signs here? They both have to be negative, because what's a negative times a negative? It's your positive. So 6x squared, I write the first term, minus 15x. Well, this one's negative. That's okay. I'm just going to write plus a negative 4x and then 10. And then I go back to my factoring by grouping. 6x squared minus 15x would be 3x. Then that would leave me 2x minus 5 in parentheses. This is negative, so what's my GCF going to be? Correct, it's going to be negative. So negative, not 4, negative 2. So that would be 2x. Negative 4x divided by negative 2 is 2x. 10 divided by negative 2 would be negative 5. So your final would be 3x minus 2 and 2x minus 5. Remember how we could check? We could multiply these out, and we would come back with our 4 terms, and we combine our middle terms, we'll come back to our original if we factored it correctly. 4x squared minus 19x plus 20. 4 will not divide all terms, so we say A times C, which is 48. And it's got to add to give me negative 19. So what are two numbers that multiply to give me 48, add to give me negative 19 would be 16 and 3. And they would both be negative. So rewrite the first term, 4x squared. And then fill in, these two are replacing negative 19x, negative 16x, plus negative 3x, plus the last term, 12. Got my 4 terms. It's time to group, find the GCF of each parenthesis. The more you work, the more you see these patterns show up. We're doing the same thing over and over when we're looking to factor by grouping. GCF of 4 and 16 would be 4. X squared and x would be x. 4x squared divided by 4x is x. 16 or negative 16x divided by 4x would be negative 4. This is negative, so therefore our GCF would be negative, and it'd be a negative 3. Negative 3x divided by negative 3 is a positive x. 12 divided by negative 3 would be negative 4. 4x minus 3 times x minus 4 is your result. And one more, we've got 5x squared minus 26x plus 5. Five will not divide all of them, so you're going to take A times C, and A is positive, C is positive, so you get 25, but you got to add to get negative 26. So what are two factors of 25 that add to give me negative 26? Well, the factors of 25 would be 1 and 25 and 5 and 5. Those are the only pair that's going to get us here. So 1 and 25, they're both going to be negative, because negative times negative is a positive, but negative 1 plus negative 25 is negative 26. Rewrite your first term. Fill in, replace negative 26x with negative 1x plus negative 25x. Notice where those came from. Remember, they came from over here. And then rewrite the last term of plus 5. Now you're back to grouping. Now, what does 5 and 1 have in common? Just a 1. So x would be the only thing they have in common. So that'd be 5x minus 1. And this is negative. So negative 25 and 5. Negative 5 is the GCF. So this would be 5x minus 1, because 5 divided by negative 5 is negative 1. So you're left with x minus 5 times 5x minus 1. Now this slide here, just for kicks and giggles, if you ever want to just practice some, you can always create your own, like 2x plus 3. If you ever want to practice factoring by grouping, you can say, make up one, like 2x plus 3 and 3x minus 4. Okay. Well, this is actually the answer. You've actually created your answer of factored form. Now, what you can do is multiply it out, and that will give you 6x squared negative 8x plus 9x minus 12. Now you see you've got 4 terms. Well, just imagine that everything that you just created up here, forget it. Now come here and factor by grouping. So if you need some examples to just factor by grouping and you've already created the answer, this is kind of a good method for that. And then you would go through your factoring and you would say, well, 6 and 8, so that'd be 2x, so 3x minus 4. 9 and 12 would be 3, so you get 3x minus 4, so you get 2x plus 3 and 3x minus 4. You get exactly what you started with. So it's good. It's just a good practice of creating your own if you want to take the time to do that. Finally, comes to our check for understanding. So x squared minus 7x plus 12. A is 1. You got to notice that. A is 1. So 1 times 12 is 12. I need 2 factors that multiply to give me 12, add to give me negative 7. And that would be 4 and 3, both negative. And since A is 1, remember what you're allowed to do? That's right. Take them right from here. X minus 4, x minus 3, and you're done. Number 2, I've got 3x squared minus 3x minus 60. And always look to see if you can factor a term out, and you actually can here. So factor a 3 and you get x squared minus x minus 20. And since A is 1, remember what you're thinking, okay? 2 numbers that multiply to give me negative 20 but add to give me negative 1. And that would be 5 and 4 multiply to give you 20. This one would be positive. Excuse me, this one would be negative, this would be positive. So 3 times x minus 5 times x plus 4. And you're finished. And then last, with the 6x squared plus 10x minus 4, to factor this completely, 6, I can't factor a 6 out of all of these. I could factor a 2, but I'm still going to be left with A being bigger than 1. So I'm just going to take 6 and negative 4, and that gives me negative 24, and it has to add to give me 10. So that's going to be 12 and 2, and we're going to say this one is positive and this one is negative because they'll add to give me 10, but they'll multiply to give me negative 24. So remember, we rewrite our first term, and I'm going to flip-flop these because I can and make it 2x plus 12x minus 4. You've got your 4 terms, so we'll group. 6x squared and 2x would be 2x, and that'll be 3x minus 1. And 4 would be the GCF here, so 12x divided by 4 would be 3x. Negative 4 divided by positive 4 would be negative 1. And 3x minus 1 shows up for both terms. Factor that out, you got 2x plus 4 remaining.